know a lot of our customers and potential customers are evaluating a lot of converged and hyperconverged, and there's a lot of questions. And so I think we're just going to kick it off real simple. What I'd like to do is do a quick introduction, probably 30 to 45 seconds, Chad, and talk about
What?
just a quick introduction, and I'd like to hear
No
about,
dancing.
you know, why Cisco, why VCE, why Nutanix for CI or HCI. Kind of your 30-second, 45-second elevator pitch on what makes you special and what kind of differentiates you in this market. So Matt, I'd like you to start us off if you would.
So I think as we look at this market, and you know, there's always a lot of comments. I think Cisco tried to approach this market similar to the way we've approached everything, which was from an architecture perspective. And how does this fit into the overall architectures? And not just looking at it from a hyperconverged perspective, but looking at from an overall you know, data center, and how does that fit into the data center?
So hello, everybody. My name is Chad Sakac. I'm the president of VCE, part of EMC. I'm also the proud leader of all of my nerd brothers and sisters that are SEs around the world. So just for what it's worth, we're betting the company. In fact, Michael Dell's betting $67 billion that the world ultimately is all going to end up as converged and hyperconverged infrastructure. We think that by 2020, it's probably going to be about a $20 billion TAM for converged and probably about a $20 billion TAM for hyperconverged systems. Why us? You know, we think it's about architecture and technology for sure, but fundamentally we think that the choice is also a business choice for customers where they're trying to drive towards an outcome. We think that customers are always looking for the simplest solution, but customers aren't all the same, and not all workloads are the same. So anyone here in healthcare? So healthcare customers have got certain application stacks that are different than if you're in oil and gas. And while some solutions can carry across a broad range of stuff, frankly, we think it takes a portfolio. It takes a portfolio of blocks, racks, and appliances, as well as turnkey IaaS and PaaS and data fabric stacks on top of them. Our goal is to be the leader across all of those domains the way that we are around CI today.
Okay. Thanks, Chad. That was a good 45 seconds.
Did I hit the mark?
You're close enough.
Dheeraj Pandey, co-founder and CEO of Nutanix, an engineer by profession, but over time I've learned to really know what it means to do business. I think the uniqueness of Nutanix is the balance between design and back-end distributed systems. So we think we've found the right balance between what it means to build elegant, simple systems, which require a lot of design and consumer-grade sort of feel to systems, and building things that are robust, available, reliable, and so on. So that's what gives us the real zen.
Good, thank you. So, you know, as I'm sitting down coming up with kind of thoughts on questions here, I figure I'm going to get through 3, maybe 4 of these, you know, with the conversation. So I went to, you know, my brothers and sisters at Ahead and back to my people at Vero and our peers and even out on Twitter today and was like, you know, what would you like to ask? So I think there's a couple of big questions that we get asked a lot when we do briefings, when we meet with people, and a couple of these are very specific. You know, for Cisco, I think the question is that you guys are fairly new in this space, right? You've had a license agreement, kind of OEM agreement with SimpliVity for a while, and I feel that's gone kind of okay. It is what it is. And now you have done basically an exclusive OEM agreement with SpringPath. And so if you're this committed to this space, why an OEM agreement? Why not an acquisition? Do you think customers are good with that? Do you think they're wary about that? You know, how do you feel about that sort of an arrangement as far as your customer base?
I mean, if you look at how we approach the converged infrastructure space, you know, today we don't have one solution there. We're going across them, and as you look at that, we probably make up somewhere around 40% of the compute for our converged infrastructure as a whole. So as we looked at hyperconverged, obviously when we first entered it, it was about, you know, working with other partners and taking a similar approach. As we looked deeper, we saw, you know, SpringPath, and I think as we looked at the technology, we really felt that there was a lot of synergy between them and what we were trying to achieve in this space. You know, Cisco's always looking for different ways of how we approach the market. Obviously, we do a lot of partnerships. We have done, you know, plenty of acquisitions. This one was a little different, where we made an investment, and it was a very, it was a sizable investment, but how we're approaching this, it wasn't just about the investment, it's the development activities that are happening between us and SpringPath.
So if it's an exclusive agreement, why not an acquisition?
So as you look at, our customers, a lot of them want choice. It's not always about one specific choice in hyperconverged. Even as we look at the solutions we've got, the three of us have up here, how are we working with some of the other vendors? An example is, certifying, our hardware with other vendors. And by the way, we don't do the certification. Essentially UCS is an open platform, and anyone can certify to it. So giving our customers the choice, ultimately UCS is the platform for that. We're obviously leading with a hyperconverged system. We do believe that there are benefits there, but at the same time, if a customer wants, another solution, we're obviously capable of offering that to them as well.
Do you think we'll ever see Cisco do an acquisition? I feel like, I'll get to, what Nutanix is doing as far as, your self-service portal that you announced this week. VCE's obviously moving that direction, plus they've got the synergies with the existing ecosystem within EMC and VMware. I feel like people kind of want to buy that, integrated stack. Do you see that one day happening from Cisco?
So as you look at what we actually have an integrated stack already, I think how we've approached that stack is even within that stack, a lot of times customers are not looking for that full stack from someone. They want a lot of the pieces from one vendor, but they want to be able to integrate to a stack. So as you look at how we've approached this market, we have, worked with partners like ServiceNow. At the same time, we have our Prime Service Catalog. Yeah. You look at the acquisition of Clicker, which we actually look as the glue for that overall stack. And then if you go down to the orchestration layer, we're offering multiple options there, whether it's Mantle, if you're looking at containers, whether it's OpenStack, or whether you're looking at UCSD from an overall integrated infrastructure.
Okay. And Chad, so
do you want us to go back?
I think he does. I think he does.
Can I stop you if you wanted to? I don't know.
I don't think you would stop him.
You and I have known each other almost 10 years now.
Remember?
Well, hold on a second. I'm looking behind you, and I heard you say you were going to have a bullwhip, and I don't see anything back there.
So look, I don't think anyone could disagree that customers want choice and modularity, particularly with the ServiceNow example. It's like a northbound ITSM tool on top. Totally get it, right? That said, and I think that this is something that it's important to speak very frankly with customers about it, the choice of going converged or hyperconverged fundamentally does require less stack optionality. Just our point of view. So for example, the relationship that we have with Cisco for what we do with vBlock and VXBlock, just to be very clear, we have 100% control. Like I'm not trying to be a doink about it, right? But basically, the business model is such that we buy the UCS and Nexus components. In effect, Cisco is a vendor to us, and we construct them into systems. It requires, by definition, that from our standpoint, that we've got embedded level 1, level 2, level 3 support access into those systems, because we view Cisco in essence as a component supplier, right? The same way that we would look at Seagate or a component. Inside a hyperconverged or converged system, any of the components, software or hardware, are in essence reducing optionality but delivering a better outcome. Now, they can have southbound and northbound openness, but if you want to get the speed of an outcome and simplification fundamentally, the idea that's saying, hey, you can have anything that you want, I don't think it would work. And for example, frankly, I think that if Cisco is serious about this space, they will need to have control, architectural control, of the critical components that define hyperconverged systems, which are not the servers. It's not VIX, in my opinion, or specific things inside the networking stack. It's the SDS layer that you have to, in essence, have control over, and more importantly, the critical M&O layer, which is the defining thing that defines the system behavior, right?
One thing I will say, just to help you from
Sure.
like if I were to answer that question, I'd say, look, that's the way Cisco's always done
Yeah.
any innovation, arm's length. MPLS always went out and they were spun back in. Just use that as a, like, we do arm's length innovation. We'll,
Sure.
Based on, because at some level it's a big company versus a small little microcosm of innovation, and they're saying, look, it's better to actually do it arm's length and then reward them for results. I think that's what Cisco.
Do you think that still applies today, though? Do you think that what worked back then with Cisco continues to work to today and will work 5 years from now?
Actually, I don't know, but I'm just saying this is the way.
Well, so what I would Chad, what I would say to you is we do have control. I think that's the essence of this relationship that we have with SpringPath. From a support perspective, that's the difference between the choice.
Yeah.
You can go with a choice where we're working with someone else, or if you go with SpringPath, by the way, it's not SpringPath.
Yeah.
HyperFlex is a Cisco solution, 100% supported by Cisco, and the integration that we're doing with them from a management perspective is all coming from Cisco. So
I think,
I think what you're saying, I think we've got that integration there that we've done.
The HyperFlex question is not about arm's length innovation versus this other kind of innovation. It's more about the baking periods. Like how long does it need to bake? Because Cisco never did storage.
Yeah.
Never managed data. It managed packets in flight. It's a very different business than
Persistence is different, and again, my friend Dheeraj, we were talking about, we've known each other for a long time backstage. The bake time for NDFS, is measured in many years.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's true of any persistent stack of any kind.
Yeah.
But by the way, and time will tell. And Matt, I've been wrong a million times before. I'm sure I will be wrong again. I would suggest that this is a thing that if Cisco is serious, and again, our framing, which maybe is different than Cisco's framing, is that we think that the shrinkage that you can see occurring in the standalone storage market, the standalone server market, the standalone networking market, ultimately means that where the puck is going, to use a Canadian reference, means that if you think that that's the future and that's the main stage, it requires a full company effort.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like for example, when EMC was doing this with Extreme IO, there was experience of managing, data and QA and product management, all that stuff. So EMC was able to give that to Extreme IO and Isilon and other such companies. That's going to be the real bar for Cisco.
Yeah.
We went actually through a bumpy Extreme IO period over the last year, when we went from the 3.0 bits, right?
Yeah, you did.
So you guys as a partner, you saw some of that?
Yeah.
What's interesting is that, by the way, almost all storage products go through a period of like a good, bad. Just to that exact point, we literally pulled people off of core engineering teams that were on the VMAX engineering team that were really good at hardening failover behavior, and basically sat them down to harden through the 4.0, 2.
And no amount of branding or the account control or the fact that we're a massive brand helps this, because it's about the honesty of really building a distributed system, because distributed systems are a hard problem. Yeah. It's not a dual controller approach. It's really about building something over 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 nodes.
And I think
So you could say all this, but if you think about it, we've done this before. When we entered the storage switching market, when we entered the compute market, we entered markets that we
This is more
weren't
software
typically
than hardware, actually.
Agreed.
And it's the delta between persistence, and by the way, Cisco is freaking awesome. Like, so it's
I feel like we're beating up
I'm
on
really
Cisco
glad.
for no,
You know
for
what? I'm
nothing.
actually really glad I'm not sitting
no, so
between them.
period, and move on. But no, but the point is that basically the UCSM innovation, and that was the third big wave of the MPLS innovation wave, right? And I remember Project California and meeting Ed Bunyan and team during that whole thing. He's an awesome team. It is not persistence. That doesn't mean harder or not.
That's right.
Right? It is a different category of computer science problem.
And I think that customers know that, and I think, to me, it's about trust, right? You can, Nutanix, it took a long time to build trust. I mean, I remember the early days when it was all about test dev and maybe VDI, right? I mean, how many times did we hear test dev and VDI for hyperconverged? And now we have no issue at all recommending hyperconverged for production.
Did you see the SAP HANA cert?
I did, yes.
Well, the
And I
other thing
think
about
that's a big deal.
hyperconverged is that it's beyond just hardware and storage and compute. It's really about figuring out how do you compete with the Amazon experience.
Yeah,
That experience is not about what hardware to use, what is the distributed system algorithm that you're using in EBS or S3 or what have you. It's like e-commerce and computing are melding. An e-commerce company is saying, you know what, we'll go and change this industry upside down by bringing these consumption models that the world has never seen before.
Yeah.
As an outsider, they're showing the rest of the world that it's not about hardware.
yeah.
I mean, I think what the customers want is they want it easy. They want their infrastructure easy, regardless of whether they're in the cloud, on-prem.
Remember, easy is hard. Easy is very hard.
Yeah.
And it
But
But
no,
you
you're
have to show it
absolutely
to
right.
them
I mean,
easy.
how long was it until these were good and easy? I mean, I used, the old phones forever and they weren't.
Yeah.
So let me digress a little bit because we got through one question and we're 20 minutes in. I'm right on schedule.
Get control of this, come on.
Look around. All right, Chad.
Yeah.
Good one. I'll pick on both of you a little bit, right? The big one of the announcements at Nutanix conference this week was the Dell OEM agreement was extended. I'll be honest, I was kind of hoping to see a big agreement between Nutanix and Cisco and then have you guys sit here today, and I was like, man, that'd be great. But I'll settle for the Dell extension. What does that mean for you guys? I mean, I live in a world
Want
where
him to start, or do you want me to start?
I could
You start.
I'm gonna
you
let
start.
him
It was your
start.
You
announcement.
better let him start.
Because I've lived in a world where we were tight EMC partners for years and we competed against Nutanix for years, and now the world is completely upside down where, I'll get to VCE with its great offerings and how do you choose and pick, but what do you do as a customer or even as a partner team or someone when a world where all this is merging together now that these things are extended?
Yeah, I think, I was talking to some of our customers in the last 2 hours as well, and I gave them an analogy. I said, once the grassroots speaks, Paul Ryan means nothing. It is Donald Trump, period. The grassroots speaks for...
Terrifyingly, but yes.
But the point is, the market forces speak.
Yeah.
The market speaks and everybody listens. That's the only thing that works. Both the companies, Michael sees this on an everyday basis, I see this. Customers like something and they want to keep doing more of the same. There's enough places where we can take our super micro hardware. And they're like, we love Dell for a lot of various other reasons. And we're like, if that's the case, then we need to reduce the opinion because, as you said, hyperconverged is about an opinionated design. Because Amazon is the extreme of that opinion, saying, look, you don't get to choose what hardware you run the cloud on. But because we're in this continuum somewhere here, we had to basically relax the opinion. And that helps us go and sell this without diluting the design itself. So we work really hard with Austin engineers to figure out what it means to really do upgrades and one-click everything. And that's where we said we'll never dilute. And I think the best part about Dell engineers in Austin has been they have worked like a startup. Our feedback cycles are like 4 hours.
Yeah.
And we never could imagine that Dell engineers would actually act like a startup, like a Valley engineer or something like that.
So I'm always interested about this, but there's risk when I do this. So let's see how this goes. Just out of curiosity, looking at the room, are there any Dell XC customers in the room? Any show of hands? Oh, I think I see one
I think I
there.
see one over there.
One there and one there. How would you feel if basically, as Dell and EMC come together, if we said, sorry, I presume you're happy customers, sorry, you're not allowed to do that anymore. There's like one fundamental rule of business, which is don't punch your customers in the face. Right? So there's a ton of happy customers. I think, again, I'm reading the S1, I think it's like 30% of the Nutanix install base is the XC path.
It's not 30%, it's so the revenues are like still 2-3%, and bookings are like 10 to 15%. Number of nodes, probably 20%.
So about 20% of node count, right? So it's material, meaning customers are voting, to your point,
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
You don't punch customers in the face. I mean, the only vendor that seems to not need to deal with that is Larry. Right?
Yeah, sure.
But I don't understand how that works.
But I think it's a great point, and I think I have figured out why. There's buyers markets, there's sellers markets.
Yeah.
You know, Amazon was a brutal e-commerce business, buyers market. You have to be humble to your customers.
Yep.
Computing, brutal market. You're imminently substitutable, buyers market.
Buyer's market, yeah.
Larry's database market is slowly becoming a buyer's market.
I think at that moment he'll lose the sailing race. But in any case, so step one obviously is, look, we think that we've got the strongest hyperconverged appliance offer in the market, bar none, with VxRail for customers who are all in on vSphere. Now, I'm sure that the Nutanix field would disagree, and customers drive choice. But look, clearly there's a lot of Nutanix customers that have chosen Dell, picked Dell XC. The Dell team innovates like crazy. It's not a coincidence that the first implementation of the latest platforms come through the XC channel. And there's a lot of innovation in both the software management stack as well as even hardware optimizations that are made. I think that the answer post-close is that we will absolutely have VxRail and Dell XC inside the field. Our guidance to our partners and to our customers, I think, will steer them along basically what we directed them down.
I'll tell you where we'll keep each other honest. They'll keep us honest on hardware. We'll keep them honest on support.
Yeah.
And we've seen this with XC customers. They're like, how can I get that Nutanix support, which is an NPS of 92? And now Dell is really responding positively. Because, at one or two places this happened, and people are like, I really want that NPS of 92 kind of support. And it's helping Dell support. At the same time, when we see Dell innovation in hardware, it's helping our own hardware actually become better. Right?
So can I look forward to one day seeing Nutanix in some sort of a whatever block, an N block or whatever?
I think that, again, this is a case where I've got to tread a little carefully.
That's
The thing that I think you should expect is that currently Dell has got one of the strongest hyperconverged portfolios in the market. That portfolio is going to get even stronger. Each one of those is an opinionated stack. So VxRail is a very opinionated stack, ultra optimized around vSphere. There will never be a VxRail for Hyper-V. There will never be a VxRail for KVM.
okay.
Clearly, there's an incredibly strong hyperconverged software stack, built in San Jose and around the world, that takes a different approach, that says, hey, let's take an approach where we can modularize hypervisor choice, and for some customers, that's going to be the right answer.
I think that's good. I mean, and it leads to the next question, which is, I was at Nutanix Next last year, and you guys, I guess, formally announced Acropolis, your own hypervisor, and a lot of the things around it. I believe this week you said it was something like 15% of your customers have implemented it, which I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm just saying that I was surprised by that number. And even if it's half that, I think that's amazing.
No, actually, last quarter we did 21% business in HP.
Yeah.
Last quarter.
So, I mean, how do you convince customers to take that leap? Because to me, you're not just buying in on Nutanix for my compute or my hyperconverged platform. And you know what? If you guys just don't deliver, I'll vMotion that stuff right over. I'll do whatever, but I've still got that. Now you're implementing what is turning into a full, operation stack. You've got self-service portal coming out. You've got all these automation tools coming out. You now have your own hypervisor. How do you convince people to take that leap with you on that?
So first thing I'll say is that we can't sell a shelfware hypervisor. You realize that, right? Because we sell hardware along with it, whether it's Dell XC or NX or Lenovo HX or what have you. So we can't fudge these numbers, 15%, whatever it is, because it's not selling entitlements of software that sits on the shelf until you buy hardware and so on. I think going back to the idea of this opinionated design, the cloud is the true north, because many people are saying, I don't want to know what components it is, right? And when that true north is saying that components don't matter, it's the experience and the economics that really matters the most. That's what's driving us actually with it. I think HP was about building a next generation data center operating system that had storage, compute, containers, networking, e-commerce metaphors built into this overall stack.
That's one area where Dheeraj, respectfully, I disagree with you in architecture and as an engineer too.
But maybe tell me what you disagree on then.
Yep. I think that it's extremely hard to create an opinionated design that simultaneously optimizes for use cases that could cover Epic and SAP HANA and also for a container-oriented cloud-native stack.
Yeah. So I think maybe this is where I feel like platforms. Look at Oracle as a platform, Linux as a platform, VMware as a platform, Windows as a platform. They had one code base.
Yeah, I get that. So what if you take a look at what we're trying to do around attacking customers that want an extremely opinionated, highly accelerated, very scalable, hyperconverged at rack scale, meaning hundreds and thousands of nodes, they're orienting in some cases for those scenarios around the idea that says, I'm never going to use a workload on that needs VMHA. I'm never going to deploy a clustered OS. Everything that I deploy on it is going to be containerized. And that means, by the way, that their persistent stacks all of a sudden need all these weird, they do not focus on like dedupe or compression. You know, they look at it and say, I need a very small amount of transactional persistence and a huge amount of object persistence and HDFS persistence. And I'm just saying, I think that the design center for an enterprise classic set of apps that are on hyperconverged versus the design center for an opinionated stack for a full-blown cloud-native app stack, I think that those are pretty divergent.
But I think the one thing that we're doing on top of it is build services. Like Amazon has services on top of EBS, S3, and EC2. So you need to know what is the true foundation on top of which other services can be built. Like our AFS is now a layered cake, because it uses NDFS, the underlying storage, for all the replication and DR, encryption, compression. But it delivers a separate filer, which is a clustered file system on top that actually has semantics to manage billions of objects and security and ACLs and CIFs and things like that. So the way we are approaching it is that once you build this foundation of the cake, then you build layers on top that you call services.
I get it. And there's no question that you can abstract and layer. But this is why, like, for example, I'll make I hope not a controversial statement. If I said this at like OpenStack Summit in Austin, someone would say, I challenge you to a bar fight. I don't think, for example, Magnum is going to fly. So Magnum containers on top of OpenStack. And it's because the OpenStack framework is very much geared around kernel mode virtualization as its first-class citizen, right? I think it's far more likely that basically Docker Swarm, Mesos, or Kubernetes, which are optimized the whole way through their stack, including how they do persistence for the container world, is far more likely to quote-unquote win than, for example, and I'll throw ourselves under the bus, than, for example, perhaps vSphere integrated containers.
You're
right.
That's right.
There's a place for those, because in those cases you're layering something on top of a design which was optimized and has a big footprint. But then at every phase through technology, there's always someone that takes a clean sheet approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just think that we're going to see hyper-converged system variants that optimize for the vast majority of the enterprise and some that optimize for cloud-native land.
It's like 80-20, right? I mean, in life, you cannot have 100 zeros. So 80-20, even Amazon is saying, look, we can't give you hardware as bare metal. Not going to give you hardware as a service. It's a lower gross margin business, blah, blah. And it's much harder to actually optimize all that. So even AWS is probably going to cover a certain percentage of this thing anyway.
So where?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, though, with what the customers are looking for is they're going to end up having apps across all of this. They're not going to just have a hyperconverged, right?
Agreed.
They are still going to have a bare metal.
By the way, that's why we have vBlocks, VxRacks, and VxRails.
Right, and then, but it's very, very VMware focused.
No.
I know the vBlocks aren't.
vBlocks are
but
absolutely.
you just said it yourself. VxRail is.
vBlocks are absolutely not.
Agreed.
One. Two, VxRack Neutrino is completely focused at the cloud-native land. It's not. It's actually, if anything, anti-VMware bias. The VMware field teams hate it.
So it's cloud apps that are native. What about getting that into the cloud. So it's not
That's
just,
my next question, thank you.
Okay. You're
No, but
welcome.
it's good. It's, one of these things is, for a long time, as Cisco, as VCE, as Nutanix, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, these guys were the enemy. I mean, there was no question about that. It was, how do you keep things within a data center as an infrastructure company? Okay, we've kind of moved beyond that phase, and now we realize that, wait a minute, we need to embrace this. We don't need to tolerate it, we need to embrace it.
Yep.
So as you go through and plan, how does Cisco, how does VCE, how does Nutanix, how do you guys embrace that cloud while still providing what customers need, and honestly, while still staying in business?
We had an aha moment where we realized, I can remember the moment, we're sitting in Palo Alto, and we kind of said, look, we have to treat anyone inside the infrastructure world that tries to deny the footprint, the mass, and the relevance, because they're solving customer problems of Azure, of AWS, is high as a kite, right? And it's scary and terrifying to traditional legacy infrastructure businesses, but hey, you got to deal with it and you got to disrupt yourself. We realized that the correct strategic way to look at them, and this is going to sound a little weird, is to think of them in the same way that we think of Samsung or Seagate in one dimension. In other words, as a provider of a commodity on top of which you can provide some form of incremental value. And we do that in a couple of ways. We do that in ways where we extend and consume their persistence layer. We use S3, use the Azure Blob Store for a variety of purposes. That's number one. Number two, layer services into them, right? So for example, if you go to Azure and you say, I want to have encrypted instances that I can move around portably, there's this thing called CloudLink, which is the #1 security application inside the Azure Stack Catalog. Hey, that's us. The third way is to basically say, if you're going to go to the public cloud, the most important thing is to be very clear and very prescriptive about where do you bind yourself to their APIs and their data models. And the best way to protect yourself is to protect yourself with Cloud Foundry, which actually abstracts on top of any of the clouds that are out there. And hey, that's us too, right? I think what I found with customers is that the EMC field teams that freak out and say, no, the cloud bad, that's the wrong strategy. And by the way, just for what it's worth, Ahead does their cloud services business better than any partner that I can think of in terms of guiding and consulting customers. You guys do a great job.
Thank you.
But what works best is actually to tell the customer, start using AWS or Azure as quickly as you can, because that way they start to figure out what it's good at and also what it's not good at.
Yeah, I think we have at least I can give you in 2-3 ways the way I slice and dice the whole thing. One is you go to Hawaii for 3 days, you'll rent a hotel. You go to Hawaii for 10 days, you'll rent a hotel. You go to Hawaii for 1 month, you'll figure out what else can I do other than renting a hotel. 6 months, absolutely leasing an apartment. 3 years, you probably might want to buy a house.
I just go Airbnb.
Yeah, for 3 years. 3 years. So there's a whole continuum of consumption of housing. Same thing with cars. Look at automobiles. There's a whole continuum of consumption from Uber to owning a car and everything in the middle. So computing is just reflecting and mimicking life, the way we do other things. Like, we couldn't lease cars 30, 40 years ago, but we started to lease cars. And we couldn't Uber or Zipcar till about 5 years ago, and you can do all that. So this is becoming a continuum, and computing is just following that model. You'll still end up owning a data center for various reasons, and you'll end up renting things, not from the SPs, but probably from an API-driven, e-commerce-driven, credit card-driven company like public cloud itself. But then the second way I look at it is that there's $215 billion of spend in CapEx on infrastructure, just infrastructure. 110 billion compute and storage, another 100 billion networking, security, virtualization, systems management, ops management, all that. And then there's $400 billion of OpEx, So there's a $600 billion of spend. Now let's look at Amazon. They were growing 80% at 8 billion. They're growing 64% at 10 billion. They'll grow 50% at 15 billion. They'll grow 40% at 20 billion. They'll grow 10% at 35 billion. Then what? right? I think there's a $500 billion spend that needs to be automated, made efficient, made elegant, made cloud-like, and so on. So there is a need to think about this new model, which was forced upon infrastructure companies from an outsider, which was an e-commerce company that never had anything to do with computing, and that doesn't care about hardware as much as we think.
So how do you get more of that spend? I mean, how do you kind of
So,
take out
I think
OpEx.
there's two or three things
Simplify.
that, first is we are all of us here are where Facebook was when it went public. They had built a massive business for the desktop, but they had nothing going for the mobile. And if investors question, they're like, look, we don't know if you'll be able to cross this chasm because the world is moving towards mobile devices. Your entire ad business has been being these columns on both sides of the desktop. And it's a question that all of us have to answer in the next 2 to 3 years. What does it mean to build this Facebook-like business for the mobile device itself? And you will see different vendors react differently. I mean, obviously, there's a notion of app mobility. We are, building a lot of stuff around drag and drop, the vMotion of the next decade. But there'll be various salvos. I mean, like VMware, fired a salvo with vCloud Air, and it was too little and too early. I think it was too early because they focused on the what. Like, we also have a cloud and it's awesome, and Amazon, blah, blah, blah. And you have to focus on the why and the how. The why is what? Well, people like OpEx consumption. They want to have the optionality of pulling the plug whenever they want. The how is web scale. It has to be done with commodity hardware and software on top.
I think the other thing, though, that customers are looking for, all of this is great, and it's great to make it easy, but how is it secure? How is there a consistent policy?
Secure.
How are you getting it up? Well, all of these things are what they're concerned with, because it's also how they get it up there.
No, absolutely.
Right?
But I
and
think
keeping that simple.
To me, those are whats. They will take care of themselves. I think with Apple in 2011, if you go back to 2011, everybody used to laugh at Apple. That's why Cisco had a tablet and HP bought Palm, and like, oh, we'll do mobile better than Apple because Apple only understands consumers. Will they ever get into the enterprise, right? And people underestimate this grassroots movement, and then they end up saying, look, we have the strength in compliance and security and this and that. It takes care of itself.
I'm not convinced it's going to take care of itself when you're trying to bring all these different.
Well,
diverse
JP
things
Morgan
together.
now is saying that the public cloud is good enough for a lot of their users.
Sure, I mean, the federal government is as well.
So I would rather all of us, all of you, all of us, actually, just like what Chad said, not be an ostrich in the sand and think about true innovation.
I agree with that. I think
So-
we're past the security scares and things like that there's
Can I-
solutions. And you're about to pop a
By the way,
vein, so go ahead.
by the way, this isn't a security scare. I think it's just where the market is going. You think about analytics and how you bring all these things together, and it's bringing those things together. It's not the disparate
So
things.
here's the scary truth that was embedded in your question. Because you were like, how will the existing ecosystem deal with?
Yeah.
So speaking as a member of a big family, the EMC family, and 70,000 employees, now 6,000 of which I'm responsible to make sure that they grow their careers, they can innovate and have autonomy, and everybody here is a leader in their own dimension too. You wake up sometimes in a cold sweat and you're freaking out about something, right? So I'd wake up every once in a while and have a little nightmare about are we disrupting ourselves fast enough with all flash and software defined? Are we disrupting ourselves fast enough with converged and hyperconverged? And I'd say, yeah, and I'd go back to bed. Then I'd wake up, a little bit later in the week, and I'd be like, hey, are we going to be able to pull together the necessary cloud-native strategy to go after? And I'd go, well, it's a little trickier, but yeah, I got it. Are we going to do the right things so that we can figure out how to simultaneously partner with and compete with the public cloud? And I'm like, ooh, that one's a little tougher. Now I'm sweating a little bit, but I can see a path. The one that I'd wake up in a cold sweat, screaming, and have to basically have a nice warm glass of milk so I could go back to sleep, was this simple fact. Watch this. Who here in the audience, raise your hand, if you think the following statement is true, that your on-premises IT spend in the next 5 years will be more of an OpEx or utility mix relative to what it is now, which is CapEx. Show of hands. Who says yes? I want to say it again just so everyone understands my question. Instead of paying EMC $1 million for a V block, you'll get a hyperconverged infrastructure thing that you'll pay for as you go. Or a VMware license that you don't buy as a one-time ELA but as a subscription. Who says there'll be more of that rather than less of that? Raise your hands. That's correct. It's pretty well everybody, because you have to be an idiot to think that that's not the case.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thanks, Chad. You just called about half of my audience.
So now watch this.
Somebody else will be in that chair next year.
I love you all. I love you all.
Which chair were you talking about?
So now next question. When is the best time to buy something from Cisco or EMC or Nutanix or IBM or anyone? When?
This is only for the idiots out there.
End of the year.
Only idiots can answer this question. No. It's basically the end of the quarter or the end of the year.
Yeah.
Right? Now, why is that? Is it
Now you
because
just made all my deals push. So keep going.
man, I'm just digging this hole deeper and deeper and deeper. The reason for it fundamentally is that any publicly traded company in particular, but also startups that are making their way and growing fantastically, fundamentally as a publicly traded company, you're like only measured every 90 days on 3 metrics only: revenue, your earnings per share, and your forecast. Is it up, flat, or down? That's it. Right? No one cares about like what's going to happen on the next 90 days or whatever, which results in a ton of stupidity, particularly if the world is going to move towards more of an OpEx and utility-based model. And I didn't see any line of sight to how we were going to solve that problem, because if the customers move that way, and in certain parts of the world they're moving there quickly. In Australia, 30% of our on-premises infrastructure buy is now in the form of a utility offering. It's a weird little Australia-New Zealand microcosm, but it's driven by some patterns that are kind of obvious. I was like, I don't know how we're going to do that without missing quarters. Amazon could do it because AWS was born inside a massive retailer. Microsoft is doing this brilliantly, and I'm like watching Satya Nadella. I'm like in the AAA leagues as a technology leader. He's in the majors, right? And you can see him shifting their whole business towards Azure, Office 365, and Windows subscriptions, and actually breaking apart their platform play like we were talking about. But they can do it because it's a giant $150, $180 billion business that has got a long tail. But if you listen to an analyst call with Microsoft, they're always asking about the crossover. How's that going, right? I was like, I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't know. How do I tell all those employees like how they're going to make it?
So what's the end of the story?
The answer is I wasn't smart enough. All it takes is basically having the cojones to basically raise $67 billion of private equity and take the whole thing private.
Yeah. All right. So
You know what? A big pile of cash helps too.
Yeah.
I think just to conclude this discussion, I think there's going to be a need to really understand predictable, that's easier to own, and elastic, that's easier to rent.
Yep.
And then really figure out a way to build bridges between the two, and dynamic bridges, economic models, what's easier to buy, what's cheaper to rent.
It won't be one or the other. It'll be a blend for sure.
Just like, as I said, housing, autos, all that stuff.
So let me ask one more quick question, 30 seconds each. I'm already out of time. Kaplan will break my legs if I go too long. So 30 seconds, where is your R&D budget going over the next, say, 24 months? Is it features? Is it capabilities? Is it management? What can people look forward to? Where are you really putting that engineering time into?
I would probably have to say software. So anything around the software model. You look at analytics, you look at the full stack. That is where a good percentage of the dollars are going today from Cisco.
Okay.
Marketing, no. I'm joking. The answer is obvious. It's software. It's the upper layers of the M&O stack, because ultimately that's the thing that is the biggest simplifier, number one. And number two, huge amount of R&D, but it's long-term R&D that will really pay off in the more distant future around very cloud-native optimized stacks. And if you look at emccode.github.io, you can get a tiny peek at some of the crazy coolness that we've got going in that domain.
For us, it's about 30% in design and front end, thinking through the pane of glass. Another 20% in the hypervisor, and the last 50% in the storage and back end and such.
Do you think 30% on the front end is higher or lower than what your competitors are doing?
I think nobody can beat us in design and front end. Like just
We'll
because-
see, buddy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank everybody.